Hi everybody, my name's Tony Bloom. I'm a committee member of the CTBUH and I'd like you all for coming here tonight. It's the final event for our 2019 Design Excellence Series and we're pleased by the turnout given it's the second half of the year and we're heading down towards the Christmas and festive season. Tonight's about celebrating, exposing and inquiring about the competition entries for the 32 Smith Street project at Parramatta. These events offer a great opportunity for all of those involved to share in the different thinking approaches for each team invited to submit their concepts for the site. The Council of the Tall Buildings Urban Habitat is a world-leading resource for professionals focused on inception, design, construction and the operation of tall buildings in their urban habitats. We are a not-for-profit organisation founded in 1969 based in Chicago, Illinois, the Institute of Technology. The CTBUH facilitates the exchange of the latest knowledge available on tall buildings around the world throughout the publications, research, events, working groups, web resources and its network of representatives. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Aurora Nation, those of the traditional custodians of this land. I would also like to pay my respects for their elders, past, present and future. I'd like to thank the sponsors, GPT, who are sponsoring tonight's event, and Lend-Lease, which I'm an employee, for the annual series of Design Excellence events. As a not-for-profit organisation, the CTBUH relies on the generosity of the industry and sponsors for holding these events. So thank you very much for everyone for coming again tonight. First up, I'd like to introduce Jamie Nelson of GPT and Alison Brown of Urbis for their role in having this project from inception. Jamie represents the developer, GPT, and Alison Urbis, and they will give us a brief overview about the project and the competition. So welcome to Jamie and Alison.
Thank you. So I'm the Head of Development for Office at GPT and I've been intimately involved in the acquisition, development and design process. Design competitions are very interesting, I have to say. They have, from an inception through to, from what I guess our vision is, and ultimately to see that come to fruition through the collaborations of ultimately, looking at broader group of architectural teams and design collaborators, as well as getting obviously down to 4 proponents actually to then submit. And I firstly would just like to say a quick thank you to James Fitzpatrick, who actually was heavily involved in with our work in looking at the commercial assessment and acquiring the site, then ultimately to go through the competition. Also to Urbis for actually working through the planning and design process with us. I think one of the first slides here is actually on the timeline, and just to show, and another acknowledgement really is to the City of Parramatta for the process that we went through. We acquired the site in, it was early, basically 2017. We paid for the land in March. We submitted for the competition, started the briefing process in April. We completed the design competition in June. And we received the DA approval in March 2018, having prepared the design, lodged it and worked through with Kim and her team. The challenge for the client in this sort of process is actually to be so intimately involved, but then hand it over to a jury process. But I have to say the engagement that we had with the city and the jury members during the course of, and the design teams actually in the course of the mid-review process, which was really essential. And then at the end of the process, as the deliberations were made about the competition. And ultimately, we were very, very, very happy with the outcome, which is currently under construction with Richard Crooks and going very well. Just to cover quickly off from a design brief perspective, our vision really for Parramatta, this is our first building out there, we've acquired one since, was to really create a leading CBD premium building. So it was to be the best building in the market, which is our philosophy generally across our markets, and we do believe the outcome ultimately has achieved that. Just to touch on a couple of points, obviously location, gateway site, experience, very much this integrated lobby and experience through, I guess, retail and the, this co-working collaborative model that actually has obviously emerged. That was very important to us. The experience of having a high-tech building and also a very sustainable building. Connectivity, parking. Probably one important point was also parking above ground in order to minimise the risk and cost really under the ground, but also to maximise the opportunity for commercial conversion actually in the future. I might hand over now to more detailed aspects of the briefing to Alison. Thank you, Alison.
So these are just a selection of slides from our briefing of the architects at that first April session. So the site is at the corner of Phillip and Smith Street in Parramatta. We've got the somewhat iconic John Andrews Octagon building there to our east. And to the northwest, over the other side of the intersection, is the future Museum of Applied Arts and Sciences site. The site on acquisition was owned by the Smith family and had a bit of a hodgepodge of buildings of various ages and sizes. Located at the northern edge of the CBD, so across the road from us was the B4 mixed-use zone, which obviously was a prime location for a whole lot of residential and mixed-use towers. But with our position there, with the major bridge, Wild Street Bridge coming into Parramatta, it's seen as a bit of a northern gateway site to Parramatta and pretty well located with respect to some major transport infrastructure. So in terms of our main planning controls, interestingly for those who've worked in the CBD would know that design comp gets you either additional floor space or height. In Parramatta you can get both, up to 15%. So that set our maximum height and FSR. The car parking rates were relatively generous, but during the competition process, Council adopted a policy that indicated that they wanted to significantly reduce car parking rates, so we were able to bring them down somewhat. The Parramatta DCP had quite a strange, if I could be so bold, array of setbacks, heights, podium treatment that impacted the site. And we found that the DCP had been very inconsistently applied over the last 5 or 10 years when we looked at what had happened on other sites, and James's great work in terms of looking at the context sort of indicated that that DCP was not necessarily to be relied upon. So at the time that we were doing our site analysis, and unfortunately is still the case at the moment, Parramatta has a draft CBD planning strategy and planning proposal which has not progressed due to being delayed in with the Department of Planning. So what that meant, we had the DCP that wasn't being faithfully applied. We had the planning strategy which seeks in many cases to remove height limits altogether in the CBD and to uncap commercial floor space for buildings in the B3 zone. So basically no holds barred development. The DCP that was being prepared and is still being prepared at that time hadn't been reported to Council, so couldn't be provided to us as a guidance for what Council wanted. So Council staff were only able to give us some indications of what they believed was appropriate, which was a podium and tower form. Through those discussions, we developed a reference control envelope that James was instrumental in preparing in consultation with Kim. So this is the reference envelope that the ground plan that went in with the design comp briefing. We've got a couple of parts of the site that you're unable to develop. There's a bit of a future setback to Smith Street and a no-build zone, or just a funny little dog leg in the land that's not really much point trying to develop something there. So we regularised that and set some podium and setback controls. We've also got, there's the tower there, so your pretty classic podium and setback form. The design comp brief also set out some other objectives. Heritage, extremely important in Parramatta can introduce a lot of difficulties for developers, but also some opportunities in relation to the design and the public art.
Interesting that you mentioned, Jamie, that James was involved in helping with all the new controls. So, because James has had a few conversations with the CTBUH about why he never gets one of his winning projects presented at some of these excellence awards. So we've committed to doing that next year, and he continues to be maybe this year. Okay. Thanks, Ken. So sorry, a side joke. Back to James Fitzpatrick is a founding partner of Fitzpatrick and Partners, a Sydney-based architectural studio currently with over 50 staff working across a wide mix of projects. He has a passion for Thai food, sketching and BIM models, but more importantly, the development of engineered timber products sourced from Australian plantation stock. He is also a long-term friend of the CTBUH, and we welcome him to present his competition entry tonight.
Thanks everyone. Always interesting to come here, and as I said, always interesting to present yet another losing scheme. So we do win a few, and it's about time you put one of those up. So also, last time we were here, Richard, who always follows me because it's alphabetical, said, okay, next time I'm going to present yours and you're going to present mine. Well, he's let me down tonight, so he's not ready. So we've promised next time we're going to swap over and present each other's scheme. Well, it'll be lucky Richard presents a winning scheme. So you take it both ways. Look, any competition, I think it's just an opening there is to say is a complex project, and you look at many, many issues. We came off this one straight after another competition in Parramatta, which we were successful on. But that has actually made another challenge, because it's how do you differentiate the product you're about to do for a next competition. So it took 12 months, but I kind of see we basically fucked it up. So, and I'm okay with that because you learn. And I do believe the winning scheme is a fantastic result and will be a great addition to the scape. So I'll run you through some of our thinking and ideas of our building. One of the first core ideas was obviously just looking at Parramatta, and Parramatta as it was originally known, which means Aboriginal is where the eels come down to lie. So such slippery things, we thought, you know, we've got a developer, slippery developer. Sorry Jamie, where are you? We go back a long way. But more importantly though, some other analysis on Parramatta that I think there is something about the story of the eels, because it was a meeting place. It was a meeting place where people came together and met. And interestingly, apparently a lot of the street grid of Parramatta was laid out on the original tracks that the original Dargle people actually pushed through the land as they were moving to their areas where they set camp. So there's quite a nice story about the relationships, journeys, and things moving out from the water. So I think one of our core ideas was to play with this concept of those journeys and those lines moving out from the water back into Parramatta. And I suppose that really drove our thinking that really this building, and we're seeing a lot of this development of typography of workplace, is really about people and their journeys to work, how they move during the day, how their day changes. So we're very keen to explore that in our thinking. And really it started right at the beginning when we were looking at the analysis for the site. And we do, as rightly mentioned there, have the John Andrews Octagon building to the side. And one of my first jobs in Sydney was to touch a John Andrews building, and I've still got the scars from that. And I think Richard's now addressing the same issues again. So we were very, very aware of what John had been trying to do with his building. And we felt also this site had a lot more importance, that had the opportunity to actually reinforce and create another pedestrian network through Parramatta, forcing its way through, and even helping perhaps John's building re-enliven its base, its context, its relationship to the street through laneways. So the idea was to push these new laneways and create opportunities for growth. So our core idea was the laneways, and then creating this concept of an urban lounge at the ground plane. So getting away from the ubiquitous commercial lobby with the ubiquitous coffee shop in the lobby. But we got both. So we developed quite a rich ground plane, and it really was based around those laneways and the activities. And I know one of the comments we got at the time of the presentation was, yeah, but you've probably pushed it 200%. Like, it's not going to happen like that. Well, I see our role is not worrying about today, it's worrying about tomorrow. So it's creating opportunity for things to develop. And that was key to our idea, how we can create an environment where we can create opportunities for laneway development, activity, energy around the building, and allow that to grow out into the city. So the laneways were key to our thinking and our ideas, and we did a lot of work about these interstitial spaces. And this is the Octagon building on the left, with John's very strong fire stair cores coming through, and finding that these spaces could be quite little interesting, activated, energetic hideaways in the city, which could have quite a powerful sort of influence on the whole city. Then even off the main street, again, looking how we could interact with the neighbours to create this active and engaging podium. The other one we've done a lot of work in our buildings is, and always use two of ours as an example of the good and the bad, but as part of that learning, is about that journey to work. And we really think that's important, about that sets your day. And like we're going through at the moment, we're actually assessing options where we're going to move our studio to. And it's that experience of the workplace. And so many buildings designed by architects are so boring. So it's how do we actually want to be in these places every day? And I think that starts about that journey to your desk. So how can we make that interesting and exciting? And you just don't jump in the lobby, go through, in the lift car, at your desk. It's how do we engage from the first base. So these were some of our thinking and diagrams we used on two of our buildings to show a good and a bad example. So this was part of some of our imagery of our lobby. So yes, you do have a front door. Like I was taught many years ago that it's very important you have a front door, you understand where you enter a building, but it was what was sort of experience you were going to get in that lobby straight away. So we proposed an engaged, active, open floor, which was nearly like the good old street carts. So it was an opportunity for people to bring in, bump in as a retail environment, food, drinks. We thought, wow, let's have a fireplace on the corner of the building, but create a really engaging collection of spaces on the ground plane that people would really enjoy and want to be in, and potentially extend their time frame that they're there, from the early morning to the later evening when it turns into the cocktail scene. And then, of course, that then engages our podium, our street wall, and creates the building as an excitement. We don't end up with a space that goes dark at 5 o'clock at night. So we let our city have a life that continues on and on and on. So obviously that journey then continues up through the building. So I'm not a bike rider, and I gave up running many years ago. So except when I'm chasing the kids, but that's another story. But it's how do we now empower the people and that activity in a building? So instead of putting that end of trip down in the basement in the dark spaces, how do we bring them up into a light-filled area? So we put them on top of the podium. We created a sort of a meeting place opportunity where there could be run out as yoga in the morning, meeting places that broke out onto that lovely terrace that looked out over the river. So it was actually celebrating that journey, celebrating the activity of people in the workplace and in the building. Then this continued up into our floor plates. We had a very simple floor plate. I think part of being involved early in the project, I've constantly had the ringing in my ear from our client, and it wasn't Jamie, it was his offsider saying, efficiency, efficiency, get every square metre. So we were pushing pretty hard the whole way through, and it's one of those things that getting balance in a design comp is always hard. But we came up with quite a clean floor plate, very organised core, but the key was our opportunity to create this activated space in the centre of the building. As mentioned, we're doing a lot of work in timber engineering, engineered timber, CLT, glue lab, and we're looking at how we can integrate this into base buildings to create flexible zones for tenants, so they can actually get the chainsaw out to cut a void. They don't have to get concrete saws out to cut a void. So it's all about allowing then that journey to continue through the workplace in a vertical way as well. And then up onto the roof, how our buildings step back to actually express the top of the building, but also open itself up to those lovely localised views. And that really defined the form of our building. So again, we were stepping away from the glass facade tower. We wanted to give some solidity and mass to it. We were looking at an element as a spandrel that actually picked up in this idea of the ribbon, the journeys, and also picking that up in our podium, and also using that to be our sunshade and a device around the building. So our facades were very simple, as mentioned. We had above ground car park, which potentially could be changed over to office space in the future. And again, that's thinking about buildings growing and changing over time. So a structural sort of diagram around the podium of the building with the wrapped timber screen, and a very just simple layered effect on the base of the building. And then a very clean but picture frame curtain wall. I always love the story of Lorenzo Piano talking about his building on Phillip Street, about how, you know, in Australia, we walk onto a floor and expect the view, and he felt that it was so powerful to frame the view. It was a picture frame. So we were playing with that idea of picture frames and framing the outlook and framing the views instead of saying there it all is in front of you. And then a very simple sort of ribbon element acting as a sunshade as well throughout the building. And that informed our, basically, the big picture look of the building. Thank you.
Thanks, James. So to follow on, I think you've already said, alphabetically, it's Richard Francis Jones. He's a highly awarded and leading contemporary Australian architect, a Fellow of the Australian Institute of Architects, and in 2012 was invested as an Honorary Fellow of the American Institute of Architects. Richard is the Design Director and nominated architect for Francis Jones Moorhen Thorpe, FJMT, a practice noted for its commitment to quality outcomes combined with the public domain. Richard has a distinguished architectural career, both locally and internationally, designing many highly awarded buildings, winning several international architectural competitions. His projects have received many local and international awards which have been widely published, and is recognised for his commitment to the industry. Welcome Richard to present his scheme.
So I'm sorry I couldn't present your scheme. I would have done it so differently to you. I'd already decided how I was going to open with a general statement that I don't care about money or the interests of my clients, seeing as mainly that's private industry here. But instead, I'll quickly, you haven't seen our scheme either, so I'll show you our scheme. Always, look, this is, I think, it's great to be here. These are a little bit of a healing process. I find them, deeply therapeutic. I never want to come to them, really. But I think I appreciate it at the end of it. It's good for all of us, I think. Come to terms with it. So this is our scheme for Smith Street. And I want to take you through a few of the key ideas. You've already heard a bit about the site, so I won't really talk so much about it. Obviously, architects were so influenced by the site, and I think in a growing, emerging and exciting city like Parramatta, it's a great challenge to us to think about how we can contribute to that. And one of the great attributes of the city, I feel, is Phillip Street. It's life, its energy, its incredible geometry, the way it actually connects through the bend of the river. It's a fantastic spine through Parramatta that's only going to get better and better. Really powerful urban context, that connecting two ends of the river. And this building, obviously in a key position in relation to that site, connecting back to the station. So one of the things we felt was that the northern frontage onto Phillip Street was a great opportunity. And we thought what we would try and do is to create a major public space facing onto that street. It feeds through to the river, faces north. We thought this could be a really great thing. There's no wasted space in our city these days, and our laneway networks is also really important. Obviously, we're increasingly interested in those. So this sketch highlights our concept for this northern frontage and the way it connects into a laneway network behind. But our clear priority was on this space. So you can see we've set back the building and the podium from that frontage. We're suggesting a series of retail elements that face onto that space, and then we're suggesting in that diagram ways in which that activity can feed through to the riverfront and the banks and so on. So we felt this is a great opportunity there. The Andrews building to the east, the setback in the building form to the west, we thought almost created this natural billabong towards this space. So this little sketch shows you in that little dotted rectangle our concept for that public square. And we were just looking at how it is formed by the existing and evolving street frontages and how the podium of the building, which is that box behind it, can create an appropriate scale to that open space, which is kind of highlighted in this little sketch here. So here we thought, okay, we can create an open space here which connects either side of Phillip Street, orientates out towards the river, northern sun, and could be quite a sheltered space. And I thought I'd just labour that point in my presentation. So then this is a excerpt from our ground plan. We worked hard to try and minimise the vehicle access. We had to come in from Phillip Street, but we thought you'd come over a kind of shared way there, and an idea of a hard paved space which the retail opens onto, and then a public kind of thin water feature there with integrated landscape. We thought this could be a great space. In summer in particular, it gets pretty hot here, so we thought a lot of shade from those trees, a little bit of ambient cooling from the water, and opening out from these cafes and restaurants. We thought it could be good. There is obviously in Smith Street a really important north-south spine. This is really significant in terms of orientating yourself towards this site and access from the station across to the bridge onto the other side of the river. And the Wild Street Bridge also, that slight kink, gives you that orientation back towards the tower. So also important for the tower, but clearly a very important spine for pedestrian access onto the site. So our thinking was there that we would orientate the building lobby onto Smith Street so that the entire frontage onto Phillip was retail and public space, and that the lobby would be here, but we would pull the lobby back in to provide, Smith Street's a pretty tight street, to provide a little bit of breathing space for pedestrians moving through, and again that feeds into the laneway network behind. So this little sketch shows you the street wall of Smith Street, and then in the shaded area an idea that here the kind of street wall came inside the building under the podium to define the main lobby of the building, which actually we keep very separate from the retail onto the square. So that shows you that concept. Again, we were holding the corner, so there's a separation between the public open space activated by retail and then the access into the lobby of the building. So this shows you a ground plane there. You can see how the building just gently folds back. We also allowed us to create a large canopy to provide shelter on Smith Street, and then you come into the building lobby, separated out from the northern space. There is a way to connect through, there's a little connection through, but they're in fact not integrated. And that's a little image from our model where you can see we were developing this kind of soffit to this floating awning that gave the building some presence, but also created shelter and onto Smith Street, and then the podium form above. And that shows you that quite important corner and some ideas and thoughts we had about integrating artwork and deepening the sense of identity of this project in Parramatta. So also, of course, beyond the ground plane, there's the tower form itself, which you've been introduced to. And here it's quite important because, the term gateway is often misused. I think everything's a gateway in the city, really, if you listen to architects and planners. But in fact, some sites are more gateways than others. And this one, it is true, I think, will have a true marking of the city threshold as you move across the Wild Bridge. So this is a little sketch of our thoughts there. You should probably saw from them, it's quite a blocky proportion, this project, and so we wanted to give it a fine kind of sense of standing, the tower standing, and so we articulated into two pieces, which these little images take you through how we thought of adjusting the envelope, pushing back the podium, in fact, to the north to create that open space. And then the articulation of that podium. Slight shifting there just to emphasise the differentiation into two well-proportioned parts, connecting through a series of green terraces and semi-outdoor enclosed spaces. And then we made a slight inflection in one of those to actually orientate slightly towards the west and the site of the future museum and riverfront. And that gave us a little bit of effect like that. That's, you can see we really highly developed floor plan. So it's a very simple plan, core, two side areas, and then an idea of a series of gardens that could work their way up through the section connecting various levels. We had some thoughts about how we would deal with the solar load, a series of folded metal sunshades to the north and vertical blades towards the west. And you can probably get a sense of those in that view. So the blades in a slightly curved facade to the west, and then the folded shades to the north, and a bit of a celebration of the very top of the building, and then a sense of that open space and the address to Smith Street. Thanks.
Now to Mark Curzon from Fender Cazzoliti. Mark is a director of Fenders and a passionate architect and urban designer with over 20 years of experience across commercial, cultural and complex mixed-use projects. He's won a number of design competitions, including 1 Bligh Street, 100 Mount Street, Queensland Gallery of Modern Art, Commonwealth Parliament offices, the Harbour Diggers, and more recently 32 Smith Street, Parramatta. He's received numerous national and international awards for his work, including the prestigious International High Rise Award. We'd like to welcome Mark to present his scheme.
Thank you very much for having us. Just first of all, just like to really say a big thank you to all our team at Fenders. It's been an amazing group of people, but also the consultants that we work with as well. So we've had people like Enstruct and Arab working with us from the very the get-go, and Cundles as well. We are only as good as the people around us, and we love to start that process with the full team. So I'm just going to take you through our scheme. I'll try not to touch on items that Richard and James has touched on, but this gateway, we saw it very similarly as a very important northern sort of gateway precinct. But actually we saw it as a great opportunity to connect ourselves to the river, the billion-dollar asset that Parramatta turns its back on a little bit too much at the moment. There was a wonderful street that actually we could tap into as an amenity, and saw that as our task, as it were, to connect the city more strongly to that gateway, recognising that the Powerhouse Museum is also being developed on the other side and will add further opportunity. So just like the river, we really saw that opportunity of that meandering, that foot traffic from the city to the river, as starting to be the engineering that flow to bring people through the site and deliver them to the river, but also build upon that gateway experience. And you'll start to see there how we've developed an urban room, a meeting place, etc. And interestingly, to talk about eels, the difference between freshwater and saltwater occurs just pretty much on this junction here. So it's an important moment in time, and there was a billabong just behind us, so it was very much a gathering space, which we were keen to recreate. The plan manifested itself as very much two pebbles, as we like to call them, one on the north being more the restaurant offering, and the one on the south being much more about the commercial arrival. And you'll start to see that opportunity that was created by eroding away that podium to create this urban space, which could actually be programmed to have a lot of different uses for a lot of different people. We wanted it as a gathering space. But not only that, it does build on that sense of arrival and expand that public realm around this very important entrance to the city. Visual connection to the river was something that we were really passionate on building upon, and so we worked quite carefully to understand those view lines and how people would be drawn to the sky and also follow that pathway, as it were, just like a tributary going towards a river or creek over here. This really demonstrates those two forms that we started to shape, the northern one being the restaurant, the loading dock, etc., and of course having a strong connection to the place, but also a subtle connection to the commercial lobby to activate that rather than taking it over with the cafe. And here you can start to see what that space feels like. The steps were actually all about the floodplains that we had to deal with on the project, and that was a nice opportunity for people to stop and park themselves, so we started to actually put seating through here and expand the experience of the retail into that environment. And of course, as one moves into the lobby, obviously by elevating it, we created quite a beautiful sense of arrival. So there was a formality and a casual mixing space in front, and they both coexist quite elegantly. And of course, the opportunity of bringing light and activation to those rear laneways was extremely important. So in terms of the laneways, again, strategically, they're part of the whole city block, and we were just the beginning half of that. So we were only half of the deal. It's expected that the other sites will actually become the other half of the laneway in the future. And you can see here the orange representing the end of trip, the bicycles, the cafes, etc., all with glass facades and activating those laneways in the future. But also, as we chug through here, those lifts that you'll see dancing up the southern side was a great opportunity to activate that ground plane as well. So when one was in the lobby, they were connected to the laneway behind and vice versa. So some of the urban sort of fit that we try to work carefully with is in the top right-hand corner. There's actually some very small-scale heritage buildings adjacent to us. We were quite keen to reference into the scale of our project, along with the John Andrews building as well. We really like that datum, that street wall. Whilst it will be evolved over time, we want to actually connect ourselves to that and elevate the tower component above that to improve the views, but also have a language. Now, this really just, I suppose, captures the fact that we've moved away away from the controls, and we've actually elevated the tower and built modestly underneath it. And what was very interesting was we were keen to get away with, obviously there's quite a lot of wind load on this tower, so by using the naturally ventilated car park, that acted as a wind buffer, but also shaping the building and curving the corners and bellying the facades. What that gave us was a massive dissipation of the wind load, so we didn't end up with that wind shielding effect hitting the ground plane. And in fact, we don't have any awnings on this project. So that is probably a nice little image that manifests all those conditions together, where you can start to see the tower and, of course, the lower podiums. And its connection to the river. This is the laneway that I was referring to just through here, so you can start to see how people would flow through here. At the moment, I think there's a metre-wide set of steps on the corner of the road that one would pass down to. And just so you know, the river is actually brown, as you can imagine. But that is a real photograph, so we made it blue, but it's because we're up with a drone. We were able to make it look blue and wonderful. But it is well liked, and I think it will just become a lifeblood to the city. You'll start to see the materiality for us and the language of the river, and we've talked about the eel and the movements, but that sort of organic quality we're very keen to bring into the building, along with the materiality as well. The third space, the flex space, we put into the level 2, which is at the upper half of the recessive podium, which gave us some great opportunities to connect into this sort of dynamic space, but whilst also activating the laneways and the urban room as well. So that worked out quite nicely. And of course the car parking here, you'll see how it actually changes into the commercial. So by allocating, for example, our plant room through here, we're able to actually service in the future these office levels and further enrich the building. Our ridgeline, or shall we say our waistline, as it were, level 7, was an opportunity for the low-rise, we felt, to get people outside, not having to drive people all the way to the bottom ground plane to get them outside to enjoy that amenity or that view. So by adding these types of conditions, not only doing an urban job but also a floor plate job as well, we were able to bring people outside, under cover, and open to the outside air, as you can sort of see in these images through here. The floor plate for us was a real, I suppose, a departure. We tested it quite heavily, and we came to the conclusion that a separated core would actually be the most successful way of managing the floor plate. And as you can see it here, it does a number of jobs. Not only is the view, of course, and is out to the north, but there are these powerful city views back, and of course an opportunity to talk to that. Looking for a very large contiguous floor space. We talked about efficiencies, that was extremely important to drive that condition, but also that sense of arrivals, one moving through the glass lifts, arriving, and of course looking across the floor plate with the view in the distance, but fundamentally tying that back to the basics of like low solar angles towards the east and the west. The cores gave us that ability to shield our building from those areas. And of course, we brought all the columns inboard as well, so we actually had a column-free facade by 4.5 to 6 metres, which was really important to giving us that transparency that we were looking for. And then just moving forward, just to show you a little bit of the floor plan, it's highly flexible, we have soft zones through it, but without labouring that, it was probably quite important. We were keen to get those same attributes of the floor plate within the detail of the core as well. So just to move through those spaces, our bathrooms, etc., enjoy that natural daylight, but also that view out, along with our fire stairs, which are also designed as intertenancy stairs as well. So wide bash holes all the way through all the floor plates, and when we could actually upskill the fire stairs to actually have the ability to be intertenancy stairs. And of course that southern facade that you can actually appreciate here, the ability for that floor plate to enjoy those views and also that articulation. And of course we ended up with quite a vibrant southern facade, which I think will be quite nice. Could have been the artwork. We did play with those ideas, but I think it will be quite fun. There are obviously going to be glass lifts as well, so we'll enjoy the transfer of people up and down the building. And obviously from the southern view you can start to see that through there. All the way to the rooftop, again, activating the rooftop, allowing the high-rise residents to have an outdoor amenity, and of course getting into that fresh air, enjoying that view, that experience, and of course continuing that language of the riverbank all the way up and through the building, not just parking it on the ground plane. So that was extremely important for us, and that was trying to get a net zero loss of landscape to this site. So we're very keen to bring that flora and also attract all the other attributes that go with that, whether the life cycle, the change of the trees through the winter and summer, etc., and bring that quality to the space. Which brings us on a little bit to our facade and about how we start to connect to the language of the river and some of that materiality. We were very keen to expand our facades. We actually have 3.1 metre high glass facades all the way around this building, and to do that we actually ended up with a technique where we've actually got external louvers through here, which are quite considerable, that actually shade our facade to allow us to get up to that level of transparency. So we were quite pleased about that, and of course that language continued around more as a modesty condition to the podium, as you can see here, and of course up into the tower you can start to see those louvers adapting and twisting and changing towards those different orientations all the way around. So we started to get that sort of, I guess, softer and more organic materiality connecting to the place. And structure was important for us, it always is, but to generate an eccentric core, to have large holes for lift shafts, etc., we worked carefully with Enstrut, but that was actually to develop a core that could actually be grown upon. A lot of people talk about buildings, why can't they be taller? And there's no reason why they can't. So we were keen to understand how we could future-proof this building. And as you can see from the central one, we can get to about 160 metres by actually adding a diagrid to give the strength to the building. And we have a soft spot in the actual floor plate to allow that extra riser of shafts to go all the way through. And of course, if we extended the core, made it 1.5 metres towards the north, and it's not a great deal, we're actually able to get to 200 metres. And knowing that the flux that was in Parramatta Council at the time, we were quite keen to be able to offer this ability for it to move and grow in scale. All is possible. So we could have ended up with that, but we are a bit more modest, obviously, and we ended up with that. So that's 32 Smith from our side of things.
Just so now to our final presentation from Harry Seidler and Associates. Dirk Manikay commenced work at Harry Seidler and Associates in 1984. He's currently an associate in the practice, which has been responsible for some of Sydney's most celebrated buildings. Dirk has worked on a range of projects from single-family residences, large-scale housing, commercial office towers to Olympic swimming pools. He currently manages the commercial office tower refit projects as well as conservation and alterations of works for these historic Seidler residences. Please join me in welcoming Dirk to the podium.
Thank you very much. I must apologise up front. Your intended speaker was Greg Holman, but he's swanning around Vienna at the moment on a well-earned holiday. So you're stuck with me. I did work on this project a little bit, but I don't have its greater depth knowledge as your previous speakers had about theirs. And I'm going to just approach this project from the top down. Everybody else has started from the bottom, just to keep things a little bit different. When we looked at the site, as everybody else has said, we've got this quayside here, and the buildings across the street have a height limit of only 80 metres, whereas we could go to 138, 140 metres. And so our prime concern was to try and get our building as high as possible with the best views. And we've talked about, you've previously been looked at the constraints of the floor plate. And so our concern, we were told, one of the prime concerns was to get a 1,300 square metre floor plate in. And if you understand our office, we always like to have very geometric buildings for the sake of structure and so on. And so we looked at putting this square building in there by going a little bit over the site where you see it in red and being under the site in green. So our overall footprint was actually smaller than the allowable control envelope. And that formed this structure with only 2 internal columns. And so you largely have a column-free space. And that's what the typical floor plate would look like for a low-rise floor. And like the first scheme too, we have these double lifts, so the high-rise lifts are behind, the low-rise lifts are in front, and then very tight zone for the stairs and so on. So and that's the high-rise floor plate. And then we have variations as we come down the building. We've got break the building up by having facade gardens and open spaces which break the building up. We have louvers on the sides, just like we have a lot of repetition here of what we've seen before. And these are the kind of floor plates where you have a single, double or triple floor tenancy, and the building lends itself to that quite easily. And this kind of demonstrates the floor plates that we achieved, so 1,300 square metres up to 1,400 NLAs. And then what we did with all of that, of course, was pushed it as high as we could into the envelope. So that's the tower on top. And then, as we've talked about before here, this is our main axis, and what we wanted to do is open up this space as public space on the front, rather than building a podium that goes all the way to the street front, and open up the views as you come along. And we wanted to address the traffic both from this direction and from that direction. And the way we did that was by having a very small footprint at ground floor and opening up the space, having public space that's publicly accessible, and to the north with the sunlight, which becomes a nice space to be in, and particularly in summer. And this is what the floor plate looked like. So we've got access coming in from Smith Street here, we've got access from Phillip Street there, we've got open space to the north, which goes along Phillip Street. And then we've got the lift lobby, the lift lobby down here, high rise, low rise, ramping going up to connecting to the laneway on both sides. And then the rest, unfortunately, as we all know, is dedicated to loading docks and access. And this then resulted in a podium at the bottom, which gave us, again, the opportunity of having high spaces and publicly accessible. And above that then is the podium, which contains the car parks, which goes up through the various levels. The blue bits are the air shafts, and on the street we've got the bus access for public transport on this side here. Some green spaces as we go up higher. And then looking at how it all fits in across the street, as the others have pointed out, we've got this existing line of buildings across the street. We wanted to relate to that. So our podium finishes at this level, and then we have at this level an intermediate space again with a cafe, end of trip facilities which face the view rather than being buried down in the basement or in the car park. And then the tower sits above that, and the tower then is broken up with various openings. We've got an opening here, an opening there to make an open space, and the podium is free underneath it, is set back from the street, opens up the street, and it gives something back to the people on the street. So, and then the podium then is, we were envisaging using sandstone, which is very much a part of the historic material in Parramatta, and the tower itself, of course, is a regular structure with sun shading, horizontal sun shading on the north and vertical sun shading on the east and west facades, and just a very finely proportioned building going up. That again that gets the relationship to the buildings along the street as well. So this is a structural system that we envisaged. There's one of two methods that we thought possible. One would be a beam structure, which can be put up with removable, recyclable formwork, or the other one would be with precast beams. The precast beams would be exposed in the final scheme, and then they're just lifted in place, or as I said, with the and here's the sun shading. This is an example of the kind of thing we are looking for. So horizontal sun shading on the north, and vertical sun shading on the east and west. And this is the kind of view you would get from inside. So, yeah, and that's it. So you can get back to your wine.
So I'd like to thank all the speakers again for coming tonight, and particularly their participation in this on behalf of GPT. I know sometimes it's a little bit confronting having the competition there in front of you, but I think it's a great experience for the industry to see what goes on in these sort of environments. So thank you to GPT for their sponsorship for tonight, and also for Lend-Lease for their sponsorship for the year of these events. So thank you everyone for attending. Please stay, have a little bit of a drink, and enjoy the evening. Thank you.